a little bit late, but that's okay. Stream is up and running. Yeah. Yeah. Depends who's talking, but yeah. All right. I miss Ken Zabel's bell.
Bill?
Yeah.
Isn't it in the library?
Okay. I don't know. That's an interesting question. Yeah. I don't know. I suppose it depends on how you read it, right? It would be end of chapter. That's an interesting question. And well, there's more to this because elsewhere in Matthew, Jesus makes reference to essentially that the Hebrew people that persecuted the prophets. He makes reference to this is the reward of the prophet. So, yeah, I don't know if he's talking about three different categories for reward, or he's specifically talking about you are compensated in kind. You know, I don't know how to say that. No, it's an interesting. That passage is there's a lot to unpack there. Okay, I started the stream 5 minutes ago, so we've got 5 minutes of random conversation on there. But let's talk next week before we get started this week. So I mulled over it, and here's what I came up with. Well, first of all, how confident are you that we're going to wrap up today's conversation?
Yeah. On a scale of 1 to 10, out of 4.
Let me ask that in a different way. Well, no scales. Are you ready to be done with this topic?
Never.
Never? I mean, we can come back to this thing, but if we were to finish this conversation up today, would you lament it or? Okay. Well, so great, that fits in with what my plan is. So here's my plan. Is next week is going to be dual purpose. So we're not going to start our new topic next week. Next week is going to be an opportunity to tie up loose ends with regards to this. So whatever we don't get to today in today's conversation, we'll talk about it next week. But then additionally, it's going to be an opportunity to talk about things going on in the church as we move into spring and summer. So it will be kind of a callback to a couple of pieces that were brought up at the semi-annual meeting. It won't be about budget, don't worry. It's not that kind of conversation. But just about some of the things that we're looking to do, and then an opportunity for question and answer, or just talking all things Milwaukie Lutheran. So we'll see. It'll be kind of a grab bag next Sunday, if that makes sense.
Yeah, while you don't want to talk about the budget, I would like, Mike's not here, but I would just like to let it be clear to people that Mike is a good reason why we don't need to talk about the budget.
Yeah.
He's done this and that, and every other little thing we do to save money around here. And there was a lot of savings to be had.
Very much so, yeah. And Mike is sending, well, so this, not for this Sunday, but for next Sunday, the quarterly report will go out. So basically where we're at year to date through the end of April will be in your inboxes by next week. So look forward to that. So yeah, we can talk. We can talk about it next week if you want to talk about it. Have that conversation. Okay, so I left you with some homework.
Sure.
Yeah. And is this the point at which the pit of panic settles in your stomach, where you're trying to remember what the homework was
The
supposed
dog
to be?
ate my report.
I remember having this. I remember having that feeling a lot as a student. No, so the homework, quote unquote, that I left you with is around the question of Matthew 15, 16. I've got it open here, one second. Matthew 16.
That's right.
The end of Matthew 16, starting at verse 24. Here's the question. What does it mean? No worries. To carry your, I'm going to put an asterisk there, cross. Okay. And by the way, what I want to talk about today, in addition to this, is kind of all the closing remarks from Jesus. So going through all four of the Gospels and looking at kind of the final things that Jesus says to his disciples. More on that later. But let's start with this question. So, what does it mean to carry your cross? I'm going to read this passage from Matthew again for reference. 16 verse 24. Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels and the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Okay. One more. So this is Luke's version of that same statement. And this comes in Luke 14. Now, large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king going out to wage war against another king will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." Sorry for the knee-jerk laugh there. So let's go back to this. And I substituted the word in there. In fact, both texts say instead pick up and carry your cross. That's why I put the asterisk in there.
For your responsibilities, things you're responsible for. Because what you can do for yourself, other people don't have to do for you.
So you see that in this idea of carrying your cross is being true to your responsibilities. Okay.
Does Bonhoeffer's book Cross Discipleship start with that?
Yeah.
But we get okay.
Yeah. That's kind of the end. You can make the foundational question that he's struggling with there. Yeah. So we've got responsibilities.
To me, carrying the cross is in my heart that I know I'm going someplace when I die.
Assurance, can I use that word?
There are actually a lot of metaphors here for cross.
Yeah.
One of them is humiliation.
Hmm.
So social, not people pleasing, is pretty important here because it seems that the humiliation of the cross is foundational to its being such a scandal.
Yeah.
And it is a scandal, and the fact that it's not a scandal and it's a piece of jewelry is itself a huge narrative issue. So it means to not be currying the good opinion of others as much as you want to invite them to church. There's a lot of cost there, I think, for people. There was a point about 30 years ago where I realized that in America it's much more shameful to not be middle class than it was to not be Christian. So to even envision what it means to be not, or to be Christian as a humiliation is, I think, important to recover the meaning of the cross.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, no matter what else we would say, I think we stray a long ways if we miss those things because they're such a central part of the Holy Week narrative of the gospel.
Sure.
So, I mean, I hate to say this, it's such a downer right now, but it's just important that we adjust our expectations of who we are in relationship to others.
Well, go,
I
Joe.
like the relational aspect that he just used in such that it is your relationship to the moment of what constitutes the cross. So when he's going on about, denying your mother and father, that's what the relational cost happened to be in the moment of, do I go and die with you? Because that's the question that they're saying they're signing up for, and he's like, you can't pay that cost. But
Yeah.
it's the relational cost you carry of the moment.
And that's, I mean, so putting that story in conversation with this one as well is really fascinating. Because that's John, right? So that's the raising of Lazarus. Well, not entirely. That's where it's introduced, right? Where he's just asleep, and the disciples say, "Okay, well, let's all go sleep. Go sleep with him, right?" Okay, no. But then they ask, or Jesus says, "Where I'm going, you cannot go. You can't drink the cup that I'm going to drink, right?" Which is an interesting thing to put in conversation with this, right? Because from a very literal sense, right, the cross is death, right, for Christ, right? And Jesus is saying, you have to carry your cross and follow me. And at the same time, Jesus is saying, but you can't drink the cup that I'm going to drink, right? So there's a not a negation, but there's a seemingly a delineation that's going on there, right, between the two, which we can come back to that. It's questions about Christology and all kinds of stuff. I want to talk about a couple of things here. So this is a really important conversation to have because this is a This is central to Christianity. This is the symbol of Christianity, right?
It was.
Yeah, that's a good point. It has been traditionally the symbol of Christianity, the cross, right? Okay. We can argue with the Catholics whether or not the corpus should be on the cross, but universally, until recently, you could point out that the cross is the signifier of Christianity, right? So when you look at the bumper sticker, the tolerance bumper stickers, the T is Christianity. We know that one, easy peasy. And yet, I think this is probably one of the most, across the spectrum of Christian theology, across the denominational spectrum, I think that this concept has the most variance on it. In other words, if you go from one end of Christianity to the other end, this is the one idea that varies the most. Okay, if we point at other cornerstones of Christian thought, like forgiveness, right? We can debate, potentially the scope of forgiveness or what does forgiveness mean, but at the end of the day, if you polled a cross section of Christianity, I'm pretty sure you'd see a relatively consistent response. I think, though, I suspect, if you polled a cross section of Christianity and asked them, what does this mean to take up your cross and follow Christ, you will get a significant variance in that, right? Well, go ahead.
Oh, the concept of sacrifice is lost as well.
Yeah.
In modern theologies of glory.
Yep.
And what we have not done as well as our forebears have theologically is to expound the centrality of the theology of the cross versus the theology of glory. Because in America, we seem to have created a space where the theology of glory is the only theology that's recognized. But the theology of the cross is that God is found most characteristically in the suffering sacrifice for the sake of not yourself alone, though that would be great if people could just be following their enlightened self-interest. That would be pretty good.
Yeah.
A much better world. But this goes beyond that, and it goes sacrifice for the sake of enemy, sacrifice for the sake of people I don't like. So that, for instance, tax paying, I think, is crucial today to the theology of the cross. Taxes are the way I love the neighbors I don't like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to keep those in there because it seems to me that Christianity has nothing new to offer over Judaism if we don't see this piece. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure Judaism, for instance, in Isaiah 52, doesn't already take everything into account that we're talking about.
Yeah.
It probably does.
You could probably, I think, you could definitely say that.
Yeah.
Well, if you're going to pluck theology of the cross, which is super Lutheran, then
Yeah.
you use the word weakness.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, weakness for sure. Yeah, needing to see the doctor.
Okay. Let's.
Needing help.
We just tossed out some concepts which, as Jill stated, are pretty foundational to Orthodox Lutheranism. What I mean when I say that is, if you were to read Gerhard Forde or
Gymnastic?
well, yeah,
Neither would say.
he who should not be named.
Yeah.
There's stuff there. Anyways, Broughton, yeah, sure, Carl Broughton. If you were to read well, even you could, my Danish buddy, Kierkegaard, right?
Oh, yeah.
Kierkegaard. The things that we claim as kind of a Lutheran theological identity all come back to this, right? The theology of the cross. And you're hearing snippets of a conversation that you don't know is going on, okay? Which is the contrast between this idea and this idea, okay? So theology, you heard theology of glory versus the theology of the cross, okay? Here's what those two ideas are getting at. And it's not that one of them is wrong or one of them is right. As with all things Lutheran, the way that we tend to do our theology is we talk about balance, right? Paradox, even. So these things are not competing with each other, but they are contrasting each other a bit. Okay? The way that's easy to point this out with regards to Scripture is this is Easter, this is Good Friday. Okay? But a theology of the cross, as I was instructed in seminary, says an important thing, which is that this doesn't have any value if you don't have this. Right? So Gerhard Forde, who what's the name of his book? Good Lord. Anyways, makes the argument that the only meaning that Easter only has meaning, so the resurrection only has meaning if Christ dies, right? And that as people who follow, as disciples of Jesus, as people who follow Jesus, we can't skip this, okay? We can't skip that. We can't jump from the triumphal entry into Jerusalem to Easter morning. Even though, and this is what you're hearing, even though that is a very human response. Okay? Any readers in here? Anybody skim through the uncomfortable sections to get to where the hero wins? Yeah, me too. Especially if it's poorly written uncomfortable section, but that's a different story, right? But it's a natural human inclination to want to skip over stuff like these pieces over here. And as importantly, okay, it's uncomfortable to see these things embodied in our concept of God, okay, on a human basis, right? The idea that our God experiences sacrifice, suffering, and weakness is uncomfortable because what do we desire from the divine? Well, in a lot of ways, from an anthropological perspective, you could argue that what we're looking for is somebody who's faster, better, smarter, stronger, kinder, more powerful than us, right? Otherwise, what's the point? Right? If God has no power, if God isn't the omnis, right, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, what's the point? And yet, this is what a theology of the cross advocates, and yet we see arguably the opposite of that in the cross. And you're going to get to one, and I could argue the opposite of that as well, semantically. Okay? But the point being, let me come back to our original question, because we're talking about how does this stuff work its way into our practices, what we do as disciples, or even foundationally, what does it mean to be a disciple? If Jesus needs to die, well, backtrack that. If the crucifixion is integral to the narrative, integral to the story and our understanding of the divine, as integral as the resurrection, how do we incorporate these oxymoronic things into our discipleship? Okay, let me try and put that even more plain language. In both of these passages, Matthew and Luke, Jesus names some pretty uncomfortable things. Okay, one of the pieces that comes in the Luke text is this: denial. Who does Jesus say we should be denying? Not should be, but need to be. How is denial an integral part of it? Well, this stuff says if you can't leave behind, mother and father, brother and sister, you can't follow me. Okay? Well, at the same time, we have plenty of examples of Jesus going on and on and on about how you ought to love your neighbor as yourself. And so those two things seem contradictory, right? And yet, they're not. Okay? And yet they're not. Okay.
Well, and in the Ten Commandments, it says honor your mother and father.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, Ten Commandments. Honor your father and mother.
Another piece is the undeservedness of the denial and suffering. It's you know, if you make your bed by being an addict for 30 years and you wake up and say, gee, I want everything that everybody else worked for the last 30 years on a plate now, and we go, well, no, it's not available. Then we have to, I think, talk about why that's moral. And here we're saying that the undeservedness of the sacrifice of Jesus makes it the crucial altruistic thing. Whereas the rest of us somehow deserve some suffering due to our lapses, at least,
Yeah.
our moral failures. So, but it goes back to what's the central anthropology that we're holding on to? Is it that people really are, again, in Kerbatis say, right? People really are turned in on themselves. People really are egocentric. And this is saying, unless you find a way to right?
Yeah.
Work with that, you've got no hope of anything.
Yeah.
That'll kill you eternally.
Doesn't it also say in the Bible, let the dead bury themselves?
Yeah. That's in that same, well, that's Matthew's version of that passage, which is, where he says, or one of the disciples, no, John, one of the disciples says to Jesus, well, I need, not one of the 12, one of the crowd, says to Jesus, well, but I need to bury my father. And Jesus says, let the dead bury their dead. Which is in that same vein, right? It's in that same vein of the disciple is saying, I raised the word, I have responsibilities. And Jesus is, and I'm putting words in Jesus' mouth here, but Jesus is essentially saying, which responsibilities are greater in this case? What takes primacy?
I've heard and read that about the mother, father, grandmother, children, it's sort of like new wine, old wine. I bring you the new wine, I bring you the new life. And when he goes through that, that's the old way, not old way, but I bring you new.
Yeah.
I bring you new life. I bring you, and it's not really, don't feed your father.
Yeah.
Because what's your feeling on that? It's sort of metaphor.
I always struggle with the new versus old language.
Yeah, I do.
Because, sorry, I'm going to repeat the question. So, he's referencing the metaphor that one of the ways in which we can talk about this, right, or reconcile this maybe, is using the metaphor of new versus old wine or whatever, right? Which is to say that, well, your familial attachments, right, are the old wine. Your relational identity with Christ is the new wine. And I'm representing that fairly well. Okay, in other words, that's how we kind of order this issue of precedence.
Or you can use the word again.
Yeah, that totally. Yeah, that could get into the back door there as well too. You could be born again. You could even put that born again.
How about using, everyone was on the passage you had up there, your focus was on cross.
Yeah.
How about changing the focus to carry?
Hmm.
Because that puts it internally to you.
Changing it to what?
Carrying.
Changed it to you, to the person, to humanity. So,
You talk about carrying the cross.
well, whatever that cross analogy means, because it's very, you have all the words that you have all around it. But the idea of carrying it, because the cross doesn't become glory unless you carry it there.
Yeah. focused on the activity, the action.
person. Like like Jesus telling people, you have to be able to be willing to do these things, or else it's of no value. You have to see the importance of taking this on, what I'm asking you to do. If you're not willing to do that, then there's nothing
Sure.
here.
Sure.
Even there's no conceptualizing the meaning of it without the doing of it.
Right.
Is a crucial piece here as well. Because this isn't about what's a thought in your head. This is about how you will live a human life.
Right. Accepting the responsibility, which was used. It's accepting that to get from one to the other. If the kingdom of God is glory, it isn't going to happen without you doing it.
Got to put the work in.
Yeah, because you have to make it.
Got to put the work in. Yeah, that's an interesting way to. Paul's struggling with that.
The work is the point. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the part. This is the difficulty here. Is that
Are you insinuating, Paul, that work could be glorious?
exactly. And why you can say that
Heard this from my dad every day.
the Nazi symbol, work is freedom, right?
Yeah.
Well, that actually comes from an idea.
Yeah.
The Protestant work ethic is much deeper in the last 500 years than we realize.
Yeah.
It's crucial. I want to just throw in this other piece, which has bothered me to no end forever.
Please.
Which is vicarious atonement. is people's get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
And I think we need to understand what that means crucially.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I wrote this up here because we do need to talk about this, but I'm going to back into it. Okay.
Good, yeah.
Because I get the sense that we're still kind of scratching our heads a little bit. Okay. So I want to frame this. Okay. If over these last 20 minutes you've been sitting here saying to yourself, well, it doesn't feel like we're actually getting to anything. Yeah, that's the point. Okay. There is and should be no easy summed up answer describing the relationship here, because, and this is what I was kind of alluding to earlier, which is, one of my foundational questions that I think everybody needs to struggle with is, who do I understand God to be? What's my image of God, right? My Terry Franklin, my Old Testament professor, rest in peace. That was the question that he put front and center of every conversation. Is you're reading this text, who do you see God to be in this text, right? So how is this scripture helping you understand or elucidating God? So at the center of this conversation, actually, whether it's been apparent or not, is a conversation of who do we understand God to be? Okay. And again, I don't want to get into exceptionalism here, but in other words, what is unique about the Christian concept of the divine? Okay. And I obviously have an answer to this, which is the cross. Really, for me, is what is the trademark, what is the cornerstone of the Christian concept of the divine, right? And I'm not saying that the idea of denial and suffering and sacrifice is not present in other faiths, because it certainly is, right? Paul alluded to Isaiah 52, the suffering servant, being part of a Jewish understanding of God.
The Muslim understanding of jihad is really, I am at war with myself.
Absolutely. Which, yeah, one of the most misunderstood and misappropriated terms in the history of everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And yet, this is the symbol that we hold up. We used to. We still do. Sorry, what I'm alluding to here with this used to, did is that if you go to Europe, right, and you go to a little village in the middle of nowhere, what's the tallest building in town? The church. What's at the top of the tallest part of that building? Cross. Okay. And the bell tower. Right? Okay. If you drive by a lot of newer churches, you may have had an encounter where you didn't realize they were a church because this symbol was conspicuously absent from from that. Which, you know, I'm not advocating that we pull a Creator Lutheran and get a cell phone tower in the shape of a cross, which is not a critique, by the way. That is a dang killer financial deal for them. And if I got a cell phone company that was going to pay us that much a month to put a giant cross in our parking lot, I would do it tomorrow, right? But what I am alluding to is that this idea, this symbol, has become unpopular, right? Because as we think about the branding of Christianity, I don't know if it's a conscious conspiracy or if it's just people have realized that this is a hard symbol to explain. Many modern Christian communities forsake this symbol for others or lack of symbology, right? It's around branding, which personally I see as very problematic for the aforementioned reason that this is what Christianity is about. If you take this away from our understanding of God, we've got nothing left, okay? And we talk about, you know, the theological conversation about how do these things relate, you know, what does it mean that our God dies on a cross, you know, is tortured and suffers death, right, at the hands of the powers that be, right? Regardless of whether or not they're resurrected, like let's read Mark's gospel, where the closing scene is the disciples or the women fleeing from the tomb, right? That's where we get left with Mark. It's the three to come that try to make it a nicer story that's a little bit more palatable, right? Let's put some resurrection narrative in there to make the pill go down a little easier. I'm being snarky, by the way, but if this is central to what we're about, okay, if this is central to how we understand God, which could be is part of this conversation, but how I want to talk about it today, since we're talking about what it means to be a disciple, is we can go to Andy's focus on the word here. How is this central to our practices, to our identity of being disciples? So Jesus says, you can't be my disciple unless you take up your cross and follow me. How do we do this? How are we doing this? How do we fail to do this? Is this an acute action? Is this something that I can give you 10 steps to carrying your cross?
Individual.
Yeah, definitely personal, I would say. It's personal. And is this a lens through which we have to understand everything that we do as disciples? I would say, you know, I'm putting that out there, so I would agree with that. Right? How does this fit into our understanding of discipleship 101? Because, one sec, this is really the closing piece that Jesus leaves his disciples with. Okay? This is one of the last statements that he makes to the disciples in this crowd before we get to this and then this and later stuff. So again, from a rhetorical perspective, it seems to me like this might be one of the more important pieces. Jim, and then come back.
Being and doing and what like. One way I can wrap my head around that is the cross is the being, the essence, died for us.
Yeah.
He suffered for us. And the what the doing is the caring. We do things for other people, the caring part, because of our essence. And our essence
Okay.
the suffering and dying.
I'm going to reflect back. Okay. So you articulated, Jim, that the doing for others, I heard that in there, is central. It's part of the essence of what we do.
Is the essence
of this.
Of the suffering, dying for us.
Okay. And a couple of important pieces in there, right? For others seems to me to be a vital piece there. Right? Contrasted with for yourself. Okay. This is tough, right? Because, well, let's be honest, self-denial is tough. And there is a temptation there as well, which is to take self-denial and turn that up to 11 and assume that self-denial is the point, right? Whereas, and again, I'm putting it out there, so I agree with it. I think self-denial is a facet of this, okay? But it is not the sole practice of carrying the cross.
one more point,
You go.
The hope is that even atheists
Sure.
will enter the kingdom of God. Who do good works, who are caring, loving, are doing the doing for it. They may not have gratitude for the essence of why they have that nature and are caring and doing the right thing. But they are, for whatever reason, but they don't experience joy and gratitude.
Well, that's an assumption, of course, because there are folks who do. I mean, I just think of the joy, and joy is central to this, by the way.
Yeah.
Joy is the point of this. It's for the joy that Jesus takes up his cross, right?
Yeah.
The joy that was before him. And unless there is a joyful surrender of ego in the Buddhist sense of, I think they're simply explicate this psychologically better than we have, which is I cannot access joy without the acceptance of participating in the suffering of the world. It's just not possible. And yet, so many of our images of God are escape from this suffering of this world.
Yeah.
And they're saying, no, accept that it's part and parcel. The only way to joy is freedom, is to be free of the attachment that you have to your ego and all your ego needs for pleasure, for self-centeredness, whatever, self-righteousness, self-whatever. So I think we have trouble explicating this because we believe that everybody already gets original sin. And what we mean by that is that we're simply unable not to be self-centered. And others are, I don't know, they're thinking, oh, sin, the way you escape that is that God will reward you now. Favor is shown in the Calvinistic sense by having great wealth and great health and all that.
Which is
the de facto gospel of the United States, right?
Yeah.
So we can have everything now, and this is simply saying, no, you can't have it all.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it goes. I think it's important perspective.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The whole
Jill, go ahead while I formulate my.
One of the things that theology of the cross, if I'm tying it to who does that tell me God is to borrow one other image, this has got to be out of John, I'm guessing, is a lamb. It's all about the weakness, it's all about the death, it's all about these things, and what does that mean for me in terms of who do I think God is? And I don't think God is a overarching, controlling everything happens for a reason kind of God. I don't think he's running the show that way.
Yeah.
He is dying to bring us in to his life to keep doing it.
That's great. That's great.
And if you're going to access that, this is the way we know to access that.
Yeah.
We don't know of another way.
Yeah. Pat, and then.
Well, this isn't so great, but this is, I mean, forever ago, if you saw a woman wearing a cross, you just knew she was a Christian.
Sure.
But then many years ago, it just became a popular piece of jewelry.
It did.
So you have to look at that and
Even a cultural identifier, right? One of the I don't know, I would hesitate to use the word trends because I don't want to pretend that I understand anything about trends in 2023. But one of the curious things that I've seen a lot recently is people wearing rosaries. Well, I'm fairly confident have never darkened the door of their local cathedral, right? But you know how we appropriate, and again, appropriate and devalue this as well too. There's a conversation to be had there. Paula.
Please call her Linda.
You got forwarded by Paula.
No, when we were talking about Jesus giving his disciples, to go out and service the community. To me, the one point at Jesus' death, when he pointed to one of the disciples and his mother, Mary,
Yeah.
and said,
This is your mother now. Yeah.
To me, that was the final instruction of, you have responsibilities and you need to do them.
Mm.
About not just Mary, but society.
Does that resonate in your personal
Yes.
life? The idea of responsibility for another, it's part of your, and you could argue, you could, I think, definitely make the statement that responsibility for others is kind of synonymous with, in some ways, self-denial, right? Yeah.
But it was his final reminder of, we do have responsibility.
That's interesting. That's a perspective that I like that though. Yeah. Andy.
To make it even more possibly would be saying something that if you don't do it that way, you don't do it at all.
Yeah.
You can't get there by yourself, for yourself.
Yeah. Two important pieces there. Right. It's not a solo gig. Paul.
For me, the thing that makes our faith so crucial to the world is that it does speak of not just carrying the cross, to be caring for, right, others. It's to say that the circle of the caring is much broader than we want it to be, because for me to care for Andrea is just to care for myself, right? For me to care for my granddaughters, it's just
An external reflection
I just
of you.
take care of me.
Yeah.
I take care of her.
Yeah.
And to be a part of this congregation is the same thing. It's taking care of this life here is part of taking care of me.
Yeah.
I can't separate those.
Yeah.
So what's the point?
Yeah.
Is that the cross is a universal thing, which means that I always need to pray for mercy, because I'm acutely aware that my caring is for those who will scratch my back in some way.
Mm.
And it's an easy tribalism, and this keeps blowing up my tribe and saying, does my tribe take care of the rest of the world? Does my tribe take care of the universe? Does my tribe? And people who aren't Christian get this too. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, for me, the call to be Christian is the call to, again, care for those undeserving, care for those who experience suffering just because they are experiencing suffering, and to, again, choose that life, to choose to be joyful in that way, rather than in this other way that we're taught, which is greed is all there is. Maximizing profit is the only way.
Yeah.
I only live with capitalism as the idea that if we maximize profit, maybe we can spend it on something good. But you know what? That doesn't happen much, so I'm really screwed in terms of political economics.
Yeah. Yeah, you're on the wrong side of that.
I'm on the
Yeah.
But I think there's a cross there to be born.
I agree with you.
Don't forget Paul.
Paula was referring you. You two are creating an infinite loop of self-referral.
They're taking care of themselves.
They are.
We're taking care of each other.
Okay. I want to try and put all the things we've talked about today into some sort of basket, because I suspect we're going to be unpacking this basket next week. And let me preface that first by saying I really celebrate the fact that this is something that we struggle with, because I would argue as well that struggle is part and parcel of the theology of the cross. Struggle is the name of the game, right? So I struggled with God, and well, then he adds in the tagline, and won, which, good luck with that. But yeah, fake news, man. Sorry to bring that in. But struggle is the name of the game. Struggle is part and parcel of this. And struggle, we can put in the basket with a bunch of other words, like suffering, work, denial, right? All these things, for me at least, are kind of getting at the same ideas. Okay? So the fact that we don't have easy answers right? So, going back to our original question, what does it mean as people who are trying to understand better the activity or the identity of disciple? What does it mean to carry our crosses? I think it's good that we didn't knock this out in the first 5 minutes, okay? If we had, we'd go all the way back to the beginning and do another 12 weeks of this course, right? Okay. And part of this is, okay, I drew a vector up here, my approximation of a vector. So for those of you who haven't done, it's not higher math, but haven't done geometry, trigonometry, and that kind of stuff for a while, right? There's a difference between a point and a vector. So points you plot on a graph, right? A point is a finite thing. It describes a specific valued spot, right? Points have, a point could be 9 or 15. A vector indicates a direction, right? It might start at a point, it starts at a point and goes in a direction, which is the argument that I'm making here is that the way that we should be, the way that we are talking about this stuff is we're getting away from naming a point, which is to say, there should be no easy answer to describe this. Instead, the work that we're doing is describing the directionality of what we're about, right? So what direction should we be pointed in? One of those directions, when we talk about self-denial, right? How could we describe that in a different direction? Away from the self, maybe, but in the direction of others, right? So in one of the passages we didn't read, Jesus. One of Jesus's other closing remarks is, the greatest commandment is that you should love your neighbor as yourself, and love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, mind. Love your neighbor as yourself, which is a quote of the central concept for the Hebrew people as well too. Jesus didn't invent that, no matter what we might tell you. But that describes a directionality, and it's a directionality towards the neighbor. It's also a directionality towards God. We can also describe that as being a directionality towards the cross. That looking at the cross, moving towards the cross, is in some ways self-denial because it's moving away from ourselves, right, and moving towards others. But here is kind of like the core, oxymoron isn't the word that I want. Here's the core contradiction of this, is that, as Paul was saying earlier, it's impossible to do this 100%. In fact, it's impossible to do it 1%, right? Because inevitably, we do things that make us feel good, right? We do things for our own benefit. And, to quote Paul, I do the very thing that I do not want to do. Even if we were to try and go against that. So let's say I arrived at this personal crisis, like, oh man, everything I do is for myself. I'm gonna intentionally not try to do something for myself, but I'm doing it for myself, right? So it's this weird. Again, it's describing this weird thing. So what we end up talking about and trying to get at is, really paying attention to our directionality. Let me throw a concrete. Let me throw a story in there, which might help us parse this a little bit. Because one of the other pieces that we put in the basket with struggle and self-denial is grief, right? Sorry, I said right, but that was a question. Do you think grief belongs in that basket?
It's not separable from
Yes.
the cross. That's the point.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's not like you can escape it, is the point.
No, you can't.
That's the whole point I'm getting from this morning. Is there really is no way out.
Nope.
We can't just go, oh gosh, Easter, thank God. Well, Easter is only the endorsement of the cross.
Yeah, it is.
And define grief.
Yes.
But grief struggle. Why is it grieving and why is it struggle? It's only grieving, to me, and only a struggle because you are, quote, denying your sinful self, looking at Jesus as what you're trying to become. And that's the
Yes. You jumped ahead of me though. Okay, we're at 2 minutes to 1:45, so I promised the story. I'm going to do it real quick. Okay. Anderson Cooper, you know who that is? Yeah. He has a podcast. It's a limited series where he talks about this. Right? So he lost his father at a very young age, and then his mother just passed away like 3 or 4 years ago or something. So he created this podcast, interviewing other people who have struggled with this or have experienced it. Struggle doesn't necessarily have to be that word. Okay. And one of the episodes that I listened to was talking with Stephen Colbert, which we may be familiar with, right? Who is a devout Catholic, by the way. I don't know if you knew that fact.
I heard Mel Gibson is
Well, let's not get to Mel Gibson. So Stephen Colbert is talking to Anderson Cooper, and at one point in the past, Colbert had made reference to being thankful, being appreciative for grief. Okay. Which seems odd and seems impossible, okay? And so Anderson Cooper asks him the question, what do you mean by that? How can you possibly be thankful for what comes out of the most traumatic experiences of your life, right? And Colbert talks about an important difference for him, which is that you're not thankful for the loss, right? Because that would be kind of strange. But you are thankful for the experience of that loss. Does that sound odd? Because of how the experience is transformative, but we erase the word humiliating. And humiliating in the sense of becoming more human. Okay? I'm going to throw out there, as a way of bridging into our conversation for next week, which I think is going to be this stuff, which is good, that one of the pieces we talked about, but we didn't necessarily explicitly name today, is the importance of not denying the experience, right? Not denying the experience, because that's what it means in a lot of ways to skip over this, is to deny the experience of Christ on the cross. And not necessarily our experiencing of it, but the importance of the fact that our concept of the divine experiences these pieces, okay? So here's my bridge. Here's my bridge to next week. Okay. It doesn't have to be homework, but if you think about it, that would be good. How can we, I hesitate to use the word learn from, but how can we incorporate into our discipleship the idea of the experience of struggle, the experience of grief, the experience of suffering, the experience of self-denial, right? The experience of loss, right? How might those things be part of our discipleship practice, right? How might those things be informative or influential in how we understand what it is to follow God? And the last thing I'm going to leave us with is talking about directionality as well, to give us a nice Sunday school wrap up. Right? Ultimately, we talk, inevitably about, this directionality, which is going all the way back, harkening back to the beginning. First day is, what is a disciple? The one who follows Jesus. Okay. So we had a wonderfully robust conversation today about some extremely complicated stuff. You can take all of that, and not to reduce it, but you can take all of that and put it in the basket of what we're ultimately doing still, even in this, is trying to follow Jesus, doing our best to put our directionality towards Jesus. The same Jesus who carries his cross, dies on the cross, yes, is resurrected, and is not standing in the back lines like the commissar saying, charge the enemy, right? But is rather saying, what? follow me, right? Follow me. Experience what I'm experiencing. Immerse yourself in my grief, the grief for those who are unlamented because they have no family, those who have been ostracized. Experience that, right? So, anyways, that's what we're going to talk about next week. If we get a chance to talk about the other stuff next week, that'd be fine. I think we need at least one more week on this. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta get to church.
You're a church.
I am at church, yes.
You can leave vicarious atonement out
Linda,
there, 'cause I didn't know.
Linda.
Yeah. Well, we do need to talk about this, but that's definitely a next week.